Have you ever met someone who changed your life, even though the whole world told you they never should? Today's story is about love, faith, family, and one decision that changed two lives forever. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy emotional stories with powerful life lessons, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and stay until the very end, because this ending is something you won't see coming. Youssef El-Mansouri had never imagined that the hardest journey of his life would begin the day he landed in America. At 28 years old, he left Casablanca, Morocco, carrying only 2 suitcases, a university degree in software engineering, and the silent prayers of his parents. His father hugged him tightly at the airport and whispered, "No matter how far you go, never forget who you are." His mother slipped a small Quran into his backpack without saying a word. She knew her son was chasing a better future, but every mother understands that sometimes the greatest distance is not measured in miles, but in the fear of never seeing your child the same way again. As the plane disappeared into the clouds, Youssef looked through the window at the country he loved and promised himself that one day he would return successful enough to make his family proud. He had accepted a position at a fast-growing technology company in Chicago, a city he had only seen in movies. Everything was exciting, but everything was also unfamiliar. The language sounded faster than he expected, the streets were louder, and even the cold seemed determined to remind him that he was far from home. Every evening after work, he called his parents in Morocco, pretending everything was perfect, even though loneliness filled his small apartment. He didn't want them to worry. He believed that sacrifices were simply part of becoming the man he wanted to be. Every morning before work, Youssef stopped at the same little coffee shop, just 2 blocks from his office. It wasn't because the coffee was extraordinary. It was because the place reminded him of the small cafes in Casablanca where people smiled at strangers instead of rushing past them. One rainy Monday, while standing in line, he accidentally dropped the family photo he always carried in his wallet. Before he could pick it up, someone bent down, lifted it carefully, and handed it back with a warm smile. "Beautiful family," the young woman said. She wore a simple blue apron, a silver cross around her neck, and a name tag that read, "Emily Parker." "Thank you," Youssef replied with a shy smile. "They're still in Morocco." Emily noticed the sadness in his eyes before he managed to hide it. "Being far from home must be hard," she said gently. Youssef nodded. "Some days are harder than others." That short conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but neither of them realized it would become the beginning of a story that would test everything they believed about love, loyalty, and destiny. From that day forward, Youssef visited the coffee shop every morning. At first, they exchanged nothing more than polite greetings. Then they began talking about music, food, travel, and the funny misunderstandings that happened because of cultural differences. Emily was fascinated by Morocco. She had never met anyone from North Africa before. She wanted to know about the colorful markets of Marrakesh, the blue streets of Chefchaouen, and the traditions of Ramadan. Youssef answered every question with patience and respect, often showing her pictures of his hometown and laughing as he tried to explain why Moroccan mint tea was much more than just a drink. In return, Emily introduced him to American traditions he had never experienced, from Thanksgiving dinners to baseball games that Youssef admitted he still didn't fully understand. Their conversations grew longer every week, and somehow the lonely immigrant who once counted the hours until bedtime now found himself looking forward to every morning. For the first time since arriving in America, Chicago no longer felt like a city full of strangers. It felt like a place where someone genuinely cared whether he smiled or not. One Saturday afternoon, Emily invited Youssef to join a volunteer event serving meals to homeless families. At first he hesitated. He wasn't sure if he belonged there. But when he arrived, he discovered that helping people needed no common language, no shared nationality, and no identical beliefs. Side by side, they spent hours handing out food, listening to people's stories, and offering simple acts of kindness. Youssef noticed something special about Emily that day. She never helped others because someone was watching. She did it because kindness came naturally to her. Emily noticed something about Youssef too. Whenever someone thanked him, he quietly smiled and replied, "We're all human. We should help each other." That sentence stayed in her mind long after the event ended. As the sun set over the city skyline, they sat together on a park bench in comfortable silence. Neither of them spoke about love, yet both could feel something growing between them. It wasn't built on excitement or attraction alone. It was built on admiration, respect, and the rare feeling of being completely understood by another person. Neither of them knew it yet, but the bond they were creating would soon be challenged by family, faith, and a decision that could either unite their worlds or separate them forever. Over the following months, what had started as a simple friendship quietly turned into something much deeper. Youssef and Emily explored museums, walked along the Chicago River, shared stories about their childhoods, and laughed over the small differences between their cultures. Yet there was one subject they both carefully avoided. Every time their conversations drifted toward religion or the future, an uncomfortable silence would settle between them. Emily attended church almost every Sunday with her father, Pastor Michael Parker, a respected minister known throughout their community for his wisdom and compassion. Youssef never missed his Friday prayers whenever his work schedule allowed, and every evening he read a few verses from the Quran his mother had placed in his backpack before he left Morocco. Neither of them wanted the other to change. In fact, that was one of the reasons they had fallen in love. They admired each other's faith, discipline, and kindness. But they also understood that love alone could not erase the differences waiting for them outside the peaceful world they had built together. One cold evening, nearly a year after they had first met, Youssef invited Emily to the rooftop of his apartment building. The city lights stretched endlessly beneath them, reflecting off the snow-covered streets. After a long silence, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emily's heart began to race before he even spoke. "Emily," he said softly, "coming to America gave me a career, but meeting you gave me a home. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I want to spend it with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Emily's eyes before she could answer. She loved him with all her heart. She had imagined this moment many times, but instead of saying yes immediately, she gently took his hand and whispered, "I want to, more than anything. But before I give you my answer, you need to meet my father." Youssef smiled with cautious hope, believing honesty would be enough. He had no idea that the hardest conversation of his life was only days away. Pastor Michael welcomed Youssef politely into his home. They shared coffee, exchanged stories, and spoke respectfully for over an hour. The pastor was impressed by Youssef's education, humility, and manners. But when the conversation turned toward marriage, the atmosphere changed. "Youssef," the pastor said calmly, "I can see that you're a good man. I truly believe you love my daughter. But marriage is more than love. It's about the life you'll build together, the values you'll teach your children, and the faith that will guide your family." Youssef answered honestly, "I understand your concerns, sir. I respect your beliefs, just as I hope you can respect mine. I would never ask Emily to stop being the person she is." The pastor remained silent for several seconds before replying, "Sometimes respect is not enough. Sometimes two good people simply walk different paths." Those words echoed in Youssef's mind all the way home. For the first time since meeting Emily, he wondered whether love could truly overcome everything. A few days later, Youssef gathered the courage to tell his parents in Morocco about Emily. At first, they listened quietly. His father asked thoughtful questions, wanting to understand who she was. But his mother's eyes filled with tears. "My son," she whispered through the phone, "we raised you with faith, traditions, and dreams for your future. I don't fear America, I fear losing you." Youssef tried to reassure her. He explained that Emily respected Islam, respected his family, and had never asked him to change his beliefs. Still, his mother struggled to accept the idea. She wasn't rejecting Emily as a person. She was frightened by the unknown. When the call ended, Youssef sat alone in the darkness of his apartment. realizing that both families loved their children deeply, yet both believed this marriage would only bring pain. For the first time in his life, he felt torn between the woman he loved and the parents who had sacrificed everything for him. The pressure grew heavier with each passing week. Emily noticed her father becoming quieter whenever Youssef's name was mentioned. Youssef noticed his mother's voice losing its usual warmth during their phone calls. Friends on both sides offered advice, but every opinion only made the situation more confusing. One evening, Emily met Youssef in the same little coffee shop where they had first spoken. She looked exhausted. After several moments of silence, she finally said, "I love you, Youssef, but I can't bear watching the people we love suffer because of us." Youssef reached for her hand, but before he could speak, she continued, tears running down her face. "Maybe love isn't always enough. Maybe sometimes loving someone means letting them go." Her words shattered his heart. He wanted to argue. He wanted to promise that everything would somehow work out. Instead, he simply nodded, unable to hide the pain in his eyes. They walked out of the coffee shop together for what they believed might be the last time. As Youssef watched Emily disappear into the falling snow, he realized that the next decision he made would determine not only his future, but hers as well. Youssef barely slept that night. Every memory of Emily replayed in his mind, from the day she picked up his family photograph to the countless mornings they had shared coffee before work. His heart told him to fight for the woman he loved, but another voice reminded him of his father's words at the airport. "Never forget who you are." By sunrise, he had made a decision. It wasn't the easiest decision, nor the one either of them had hoped for. Instead of asking Emily to choose between him and her family, or asking her to abandon her faith, he suggested something neither of them had considered before. "Let's stop trying to convince everyone," he told her during one final meeting. "Let's give them time. Real love doesn't force people to change overnight. If what we have is real, it will survive patience." Emily looked into his eyes and saw no anger, no pressure, and no desperation, only sincerity. With tears in her eyes, she nodded. They agreed to step back from wedding plans, continue living their own lives, and allow both families to see that their relationship was built on respect rather than rebellion. It was the hardest promise either of them had ever made, because it meant loving each other without knowing if they would ever be together. The months that followed were painfully quiet. They spoke only occasionally, never to argue or persuade each other, but simply to ask how the other was doing. Youssef focused on his work, earning the respect of his colleagues through honesty and dedication. On weekends, he continued volunteering at the homeless shelter where he and Emily had first served together. Unknown to him, Pastor Michael quietly visited the shelter one afternoon after hearing from another volunteer about a young Moroccan man who never sought recognition for his kindness. Standing at a distance, the pastor watched Youssef patiently helping an elderly homeless veteran repair his broken wheelchair before serving meals to dozens of families. No cameras, no applause, no Emily, just compassion. At that moment, Pastor Michael realized that Youssef wasn't pretending to be a good man to impress his daughter. This was simply who he was. Around the same time in Morocco, Youssef's parents noticed something else. Despite living thousands of miles away and facing emotional hardship, their son had never stopped calling them, never stopped praying, and never forgot the values they had raised him with. Little by little, fear began to give way to understanding. Almost a year after their heartbreaking goodbye, Emily received an unexpected phone call from her father. "Would you invite Youssef to dinner this Sunday?" he asked. She froze in disbelief. When Sunday finally arrived, Youssef walked into the Parker family home with the same humility he had shown on his first visit, expecting another difficult conversation. Instead, Pastor Michael stood up, extended his hand, and then surprised everyone by pulling Youssef into a warm embrace. "I judged the future before I truly understood the man standing in front of me," he said quietly. "I still know our beliefs are different, and those differences are real, but I've learned something this past year. A person's character speaks louder than my fears ever could." At nearly the same time, Youssef's parents called from Morocco. His father smiled proudly, while his mother, her voice trembling with emotion, said, "If she respects your faith, loves you sincerely, and helps you become a better man, then she is welcome in our family." Tears filled Youssef's eyes as years of anxiety disappeared in a single moment. Several months later, friends and relatives from two different continents gathered for a simple wedding celebration. There were Moroccan traditions, American traditions, laughter, unfamiliar customs, and plenty of moments where both families learned something new about each other. Nobody had been asked to abandon their identity. Nobody had been forced to become someone they weren't. Instead, they chose respect over fear, patience over pride, and understanding over prejudice. As the evening came to an end, Youssef looked around the room and remembered the lonely young immigrant who had arrived in Chicago, carrying 2 suitcases and a heart full of uncertainty. He had crossed an ocean searching for a career, but he had discovered something far greater: the truth that love cannot erase every difference, but genuine respect can build bridges where fear once built walls. And perhaps that was the decision that truly changed their lives forever. Because in the end, it wasn't love that defeated their differences. It was patience, humility, and the courage to see each other first as human beings.